Good morning, everyone. Again, this is the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development, Thursday, January 16th, 2025 at 11:15 in the morning. So we're back from another short break. And now we're here to have some introductions and discussions with our financial institutions. So first is our Vermont Bankers Association. Chris, welcome. I don't know, you said something about passing out photographs
And signing them based on my performance yesterday. Yes, I'm going to regret that video being shown. I know, especially with you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. For the record, Chris Delia, President, Vermont Bankers Association. Thank you for the opportunity to come in and visit with you this morning. Mr. Chairman, it's good to see Pownell back on the committee. Yeah, it's been a while since we've had a representative from Pownell, so it's great to see you. Before I go into the association and the banking industry, I'll just give you a little bit about my background. So I've been with the association for 22 years. My role, aside from the day-to-day operations, is to focus on government relations activities, both here at the state level and down in DC. I'm also responsible for educational programs at all levels of the industry here in Vermont, and also public relations questions that we tend to get from the media around the state. Prior to joining the association, I was Commissioner of Economic Development for 2 years under Howard Dean. I also ran the Vermont Economic Progress Council for 3.5 years, and I was also director of the Lamoille Economic Development Corporation for 4 years up in Lamoille County. So when I combine that career, I've actually been in this building and working with this committee for 33 years. So I've seen a lot of faces come and go and a lot of topics come and go. So it's great to be able to continue working with you. For the association, we're like any other trade association that you might know out there in the marketplace. We just happen to represent the banking industry here. So compared to other lobbyists in the building, I only have one client, and that's the banking industry. I don't have to worry about others that might be out there. As far as the membership is concerned, we have 25 banks that are members of the association. They range in size from about 80 million to several $billion in size. So you can think of a small bank like the First National Bank of Orwell with only 2 branches, to the largest of a Bank of America or Chase that we would represent as well. We have 2 independent trust companies that I think you heard a little bit about yesterday with Aaron from the Department of Financial Regulation. They're members of ours as well. We have an employee base of just over 2,800 employees. We have 235 branches around the state, and an average wage of just over $48,000, and a fairly robust benefit package that's offered by a number of our institutions. I thought what would be helpful for you folks is to talk a little bit about the difference in charters. Aaron alluded to it briefly yesterday, but I think it'll help set the context for some of the future discussions that we'll have. So if you will, Aaron talked about the state chartered institutions. So a state chartered bank is created and regulated under Vermont's banking regulations. This is typically Title VIII. They also can be regulated by federal regulators. So for example, every bank is regulated by the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. They're the folks that we work with to provide deposit insurance for our customers. So even though you might be state chartered, you also have the FDIC as your regulator. And the way they work closely is during the examination periods, they'll alternate examination schedules so that one year you may have the state coming in, another year you may have the FDIC coming in. But their focus is all about state regulations that are governing what they can do here in Vermont. You also heard from the Attorney General, and this is, again, unique to Vermont. Title IX, our consumer protection statutes, also apply to the banking industry, whether you're a state chartered or you're a nationally chartered institution. That's why government relations tends to be a big priority for my national banks, because that is unique to Vermont, and they obviously want us to watch what's going on regarding conversations about consumer protections. You then have nationally chartered institutions. So that would be, for example, a National Bank of Middlebury. I should also give you an example of a state chartered. Union Bank, Brattleboro Savings and Loan, Passumpsic Savings Bank, those are state chartered institutions. Nationally chartered bank, again, I'll use National Bank of Middlebury as an example. They also have the FDIC as a regulator, but their primary regulator is the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. National Bank of Middlebury follows federal regulations that are issued by, again, the FDIC or the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. If they happen to be a stock bank, then the SEC, Securities Exchange Commission, is also a regulator. If you are a financial institution above a certain threshold, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau would be your regulator as well. We have some national banks and some state chartered banks that work closely with the Federal Reserve. All of this is to say we have multiple regulators, and as an institution, you might have two, but you could theoretically have three or four that you have to follow. There's a great deal of coordination at the national level amongst the regulators. So when new initiatives come out, like a revision of the Community Reinvestment Act, our national regulators coordinate to come out with one policy that the financial institutions will have to follow. So you have this body of regulation at the federal level, you have this body of regulation at the state level that banks need to adhere to. There are advantages and disadvantages to being one charter versus another. I know DFR likes our state chartered institutions. They're a very good regulator to work with, and it gives them more control over some of the banking industry here in Vermont. I will tell you that the banking industry has evolved dramatically. And for some of our competitors out there in the marketplace, the regulations have not kept pace with what applies to the financial institutions. So in my day growing up, I had a small passbook savings account at a financial institution. I'm old school. I still walk into a bank. But this is how a lot of people do banking these days. This is how a lot of people do banking with your iPads and laptops. I can sit in my home tonight, and if I'm looking to get a mortgage, I can shop around and have 5, 10 banks bidding on my mortgage. I can go ahead and open accounts online. I can use, non-traditional payment methods, Apple Pay, PayPal, Venmo, et cetera. So the banking industry has changed, or let me say, the financial services industry has changed dramatically. So what used to be the competitor on Main Street is now a competitor somewhere else. I mean, we still compete on Main Street, but there's a lot of other folks out there that we don't compete with. And when I say, excuse me, regulation hasn't kept pace, especially at the federal level, where some of those fintech companies, you heard that term yesterday, are not regulated in the same way, but maybe offering the same type of service to the consumers. So this is always a discussion that's going on at the federal level. So again, government relations, incredibly important. You'll hear me come in and meet with the committee on various topics, and I'm going to present to you information that demonstrates if we're regulated or not, and that will help to inform you why we take positions that we do on certain pieces of legislation that you're going to go through. I'm here every day, as I've been hovering on the sidelines over the last few days, because I'll need to know what's going on in the various committees around this building. I've touched on every committee in 22 years. And I still marvel at where I can find myself on a topic that you may not think ever relates to banking or financial services, but somehow it does. So I've had some very unique issues over the years. What you will see me on mostly in this particular committee is any issues that are related to lending, whether it's mortgage or commercial or otherwise. Debt collection often is a topic that comes up that we'll be involved with. You folks have already heard a little bit about privacy. You're going to have a fairly significant discussion on that. AI is very much of interest to our industry from the perspective that there's great opportunity for responsible users. And we know that there are a lot of bad actors out there that we need to be mindful of. Your challenge, I think, is how do you create legislation that remains current and useful when you've got technology that's changing on a monthly basis? So you don't want to do something that's outdated 6 months from now. That's really challenging to do. Energy efficiency is one that we're also involved with in discussions on impact on homeowners. Any property related issues we'll be involved with. We get involved with town charters in many instances because of some of the discussions about how properties are dealt with in local communities, tax policy. You may hear some discussions on interchange. That's the fees associated with debit cards and credit cards that merchants pay. The crypto kiosk bill that or study that Aaron referred to is one that we'll be interested in. And then you heard a little bit about it from the Attorney General, but I want to focus just a few minutes on it. And that's on the issue of fraud and scams that's happening out there in the marketplace. So as you can imagine, we are on the front line with our customers trying to push back on frauds and scams that are out there. We're trying to educate our customers on a daily basis. Over the last 12 to 18 months, we have just seen an explosion of the amount of bad actors that are operating in our state. And it isn't just the online folks. It's online, but they're also sending what we would call mules into the state to do actual cash pickups at people's homes and other locations. And I saw a very frightening video from a representative from Homeland Security about one of these transactions that were going on. It's pretty devastating when you think about what's happening in the market and the losses that any given number could be at about 150 billion on average that's happening out there in the total marketplace across the country. It is the romance scams. It's the computer scams that you heard of. It's the lottery scams. It's the grandson or granddaughters in trouble. It's a lot of different things. And what we do as an industry is first and foremost educate our frontline folks to recognize when somebody comes in and says, I need to withdraw a large sum of money. It's an unusual transaction. And we start that conversation with that person. We provide a lot of information through social media and our web platforms. We have flyers in our lobbies, et cetera. And ultimately, the goal is to talk that person back from doing something that would be ill-advised. But at the end of the day, it's their money. So I want to tie it into a discussion on the report of crypto kiosks. We had an individual down in Southern Vermont who got an email that looked like it was from their bank. And this would be called spoofing. It's where you're either getting a phone call and it looks like it's coming from your bank. You get the email, it looks like it's coming from your bank. And in this case, they said, there's a problem with your account. We need you to withdraw funds, and the number was $9,000. We need you to go to a crypto kiosk machine in New Hampshire, Keene, deposit the money. It will route back to your account, and that will fix the problem. Bank folks tried to talk this individual into not doing it. He was convinced it was a problem, took the money out, put it in the kiosk, and it's gone. It's very, very, very difficult to track where it goes in that type of environment. So it isn't the crypto company itself, it's how that technology can be used in a fraudulent way. We have used that type of technology. I'll give you an example in AI. We had one of our bank presidents that worked with a company that developed an AI profile of the president using his voice. They used it to make phone calls to some key staff within the bank, and the request was to conduct a wire transfer for a client. The purpose of it was to check how their bank personnel were doing. Thankfully, nobody fell for it. And they were able to distinguish in terminology, the way the message was being conveyed, and the simple fact that my bank CEO would never call me and ask me to do this, but it's a way of using AI. So these things are very important to us. Some of the more global issues that we're very focused on: housing, workforce development, economic development, healthcare, and the crisis that we're facing in Vermont. State budget, taxes, public safety is a big, big issue for us. So you will see me a lot. My goal is to work with you to come up with good public policy that supports our institutions, but more importantly, supports our customers and allows us to serve our customers in the best way. So I'll work with you on bills, but I also want you to know that I am more than happy to work with you on constituent issues. I do this, quite frankly, selfishly, because if I can help you with the one-off constituent issue, it usually doesn't show up in a bill. And it usually is a one-off topic. For as much as I love the full-time employment you all give me, if we can take a few things off of your bulletin board when that starts to fill up, all the better. So please don't ever hesitate to outreach to me, to contact me. Again, you'll see me in the room a lot on various issues, and happy to take any questions that you may have.
Chris?
Just real curious.
Not you, sorry. I know your history. I have to say, Herb and I have worked in his different capacity. I'm so happy to see you back here in this
It's good to see you,
capacity.
Dave. Chris. Just curious, is this kiosk, is that an actual physical
Yes.
thing?
So think of the gray kiosks that you might find in some small retail shops.
Yeah,
It doesn't exactly look like an ATM machine that we traditionally use, but it is a kiosk that's available to consumers if they want to engage in crypto transactions. I think there's a premise by some to even need to have that because there's access to doing transactions in many different ways. But these machines do exist in Vermont. We had 37. I think we're down to 3 now. You all passed some legislation last year, and I'm anxious to see what the report says because you may or may not have any.
Yeah, if you go on our webpage, the report's there.
It's there.
Yeah.
So it is a technology that's out there, and we just look at it from the protection of a consumer. If the bad actors are able to use that technology, that's a problem. So how do you address that?
Thank you. We'll say Chris is very responsive to anything that your constituents have a problem with. And I mean, wasn't a constituent of some but being in the position I sit in, I get some of these from your constituents as well, and I pass it on. Just remember, there's always 2 sides to a story. So, but you know, Chris will certainly follow up on it. I know anytime I've asked him to take a look at things, he gets right to it. So appreciate that.
Yeah, happy to.
Any other questions for Chris? Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe, how are you? Good to see you again.
Well, happy New Year. A little late. Thank you for giving us time. I'm going to try not to be redundant with everything that you just heard, but we are financial institutions too, so it's a lot of the same issues. My name is Joe Bergeron. I am president of the Association of Vermont Credit Unions. This is the first time, although it's in the history books now, but I get to congratulate so many of you on your successful election. And more importantly for all of you, and re-election for others. And equally important, your appointment to this committee, because as Chris would attest to, you know, all of our, not all, many of the issues that our industry has to deal with in each legislative session originate or come through here in some way, shape, or form. And you did amazing work This committee does amazing work. You know, I too have been in the State House a long time. And, you know, it occurs to me when we're at the beginning of a session like this, that I like what I do and I've done for decades because of the variety of work in a trade association and the things that we do in ours, which I'll tell you a little bit about briefly. But the variety kind of pales by comparison to what you as lawmakers, even under the umbrella of commerce, touch on in this committee, and all of the different things that you have to become versed in to some degree in the weeds that you all have to get into and whatnot. And when you know the general public out there that is not fortunate enough, like those of us that sit in these committee rooms from time to time, the general public may hear from time to time or read something in the press or media about some lawmaker talking about one particular issue, but that's just one. And even in this committee on that board, I know not too far down the road, you're going to have a gazillion issues up there that are all over the place, even though they're all under the same umbrella of commerce. So kudos to all of you. Thanks for the work that you do here in helping Vermonters and addressing all those different issues. A little bit about our association first, even though I'm here to talk about credit unions mostly. We are a small trade association. We represent credit unions in the state of Vermont. Unlike Chris, I am not here every day. And that's because our association is a little bit different in terms of we are an advocacy organization first. That's the reason that we exist, or so I believe anyway. And communications that goes along with it and education and whatnot. But we also have a handle in a number of back office kinds of related services that we provide to our credit unions to help facilitate them. And those kinds of things started a long, long time ago when credit unions on average were a lot smaller than they are now. And so we helped credit unions have, when ATMs and debit cards and credit unions weren't a thing, we got involved in that and helped facilitate that for credit unions. And things like that have grown since then. So we have some other less than typical trade association activities that we do to support our credit unions in the background. So because of that, we're fortunate to have the services of the Necrason Group that we utilize with Adam and Jessica Oskey, who you'll see in this room through the session. Both are here every day on a variety of different issues, and they're kind of our eyes and ears on credit union issues. And I've also got with me today Carrie Allen, who is the most recent addition to our association. She is filling a new role of executive vice president in our organization. And her job for the last 5 months has been less than well-defined in terms of it's just learn everything. And this is part of the learn everything. So that's why she's here with me today. So you'll see Carrie with me from time to time in here when we're testifying or in meetings or events or whatever else. So thank you for giving me time to share that. Credit unions in Vermont. I've got a little handout that I think you got access to digitally, but for those that prefer paper, because some do, I'll just pass that around. And I don't intend to go through that in line by line or in detail or anything, but it's just for your reading. But I think that there is some data in there that you will have some interest in probably that you might not have known about credit unions. You know, like I said at the onset, credit unions in Vermont and nationwide, you know, we're in the banking sector, right? So we have a lot of the same issues when it comes to consumer related issues and fintech competitors and so on and so forth as other financial institutions. I think what differs credit unions, and by the way, I forgot to mention that, you know, 2 out of every 3 Vermonters, and you'll see that printed in there, 2 out of every 3 Vermonters are members of a credit union, 1 or more credit unions. So there's a pretty good chance that most of us in this room are a member of at least 1, maybe multiple credit unions. And I think when we get beyond people that are in the inner circle of financial services like all of us and to regular consumers on the street, you know, they probably end up in a credit union because they were shopping around for the best car loan rate or a new checking account or a mortgage or whatever it is. Hopefully they learn about their credit union, you know, after they've established that relationship. But, you know, what I tried to put across in some of the material that you'll see in here is that the uniqueness of credit unions in the marketplace is that they are financial cooperatives. And I know we tout that a lot, and that may or may not be meaningful to you. But for me, after decades of watching credit unions and the boards that operate them operate, it means that the motivations behind credit unions and the decision-making process in their boardroom and at the management level are different than other organizations. Credit unions have to be profitable, just like any business, just like a bank, just like an insurance company, just like a shoe store or what have you on the street. But all of those different entities, exist to provide a service and hopefully generate some kind of return to the people that own the business, right? But in a credit union as a cooperative, just like a food cooperative or an electric cooperative or others that you may know or be members of, all the people that do business with it are the owners. And so those profits that that entity, a credit union, generates over the year go back to the benefit of all of those owners. And that's how credit unions use better interest rates, lower fees, and so on and so forth as the means to get that profit back into the hands, back into the pockets of those individuals. And so when a credit union board of directors is sitting around a table like this, trying to decide what's the new service we're going to provide, how are we going to price our 30-year mortgage or checking account, or so on and so forth, what is driving them and motivating them is not the profit to go to some subset of owners, which is fine in those organizations, but to go to all of the people that do business with the organization. And that's what makes credit unions unique. That also is a driving force when credit unions are talking about some of the issues that you entertain in a building like this as lawmakers, when we're talking about the housing crisis, financial literacy, fraud, and so on and so forth, issues like that that affect their owners, their members, the 2/3 of Vermonters who are owners of credit unions. So credit unions in Vermont have become very active in those arenas because the people that employ them are the people that they're servicing. So just a couple of highlights that I want to point out to you in this handout is one in the area of, I mentioned the housing crisis. And part of the housing crisis is about, the availability of housing, period. But an equally important part of it is affordability, right? And there are segments of the population that I'm addressing in data in this handout, the single sheet here that you can look at your leisure. But the bottom line here is I grabbed this because I used it for other purposes a year or so ago. And you'll see from this data when you have time to go through it that credit unions approve 67% of all of the mortgage applications that they receive from low to moderate income individuals, which you might ask, well, why can't that number be better? Why can't it be 70% or 75% or 80 or whatever? But you've got to take it in context of the whole industry. So look at comparison to other financial institutions. When it says banks on this sheet, by the way, I don't want to leave you thinking that that's Vermont banks. That's the columns you'll see in this data are all credit unions that make mortgages in the state of Vermont and all other financial institutions and mortgage providers that provide mortgages to Vermonters in the state of Vermont. So that column that says banks on it is not just Vermont community banks. It is large out-of-state banks. It's large mortgage entities out of state and so on and so forth. But the important part here is that 90%, even though I mentioned there are 16 credit unions in Vermont, and there's 44 reflected up here, but those 16 credit unions, actually a subset of those 16, because not all 16 are sizable enough to do mortgages. 90% of this column that you see here of mortgages approved for all of these different categories of individuals are provided by Vermont credit unions. And so probably, I'd say like half of those 16 credit unions. So we're really proud of the fact that credit unions work really hard to improve the financial well-being of all of their members in all of the different financial categories that they have in their communities and the people that they serve. Couple other issues, privacy. Chris mentioned about a privacy bill that we'll be looking at again this year. And we're anxious to work with the committee and others on all of that. Credit unions as financial service providers and serving the owners of their institutions take privacy incredibly seriously and absolutely never, ever, ever sell consumer confidential private information to anybody. For a long time, we've been lobbying in Congress for stronger privacy controls. We see fraud, like Chris mentioned, every day, multiple times a day in financial institutions. And it has grown incredibly complex. Sometimes I think, and it's sad to think this, but a lot of the technical innovation that I see anyway, that I just work with on my own laptop and your iPads and so on and so forth, is brought about because of having to counteract the bad actors out there that are trying to push the envelope all of the time and sending you fraudulent emails and whatnot, trying to get you to put in your credit card number and so on and so forth. But in spite of that, credit unions, are extremely concerned about the handling of consumer non-public private information and hope for a day when, whether it's at the federal level or state level, where we have everybody that touches confidential information gathered from your financial transaction, your mortgage application, whatever it happens to be out there, having every party that has any access to any confidential information of yours, that they are all required to treat it the same way that financial institutions already have to handle that information and have the same liability consequences imposed on them for mishandling that information. And so we're anxious to work with the committee on that. Business lending, we know the development of businesses went through a hard time during COVID. A lot of credit unions got involved in helping small Vermont businesses because of that member ownership structure of a cooperative that I referenced. A lot of small businesses or beginning entrepreneurs turned to their credit union for assistance. And a great many credit unions in Vermont got involved with SBA related lending, who weren't involved with it before, or their own direct lending. Credit unions, if you look at business lending and credit unions, it wasn't, there were credit unions doing business lending before the pandemic, but it ramped up considerably since then. Credit unions are the only lender, I believe, that have at the federal level a cap imposed on how much business lending they can do. Right at the moment, I don't know that there's any credit unions bumping up against that cap, but removing it at the federal level is something that we've been working on for a very long time now. But business lending in Vermont credit unions is not entirely, but in large part focused on small entrepreneurial kind of business loans. Look at like Opportunities Credit Union that you may have heard of before that specializes in microloans of like $10,000 or less, or a loan program that they created for people who have low credit scores and trying to get started in a business, or maybe no credit scores. So credit unions like Opportunities, all credit unions really, but I point that one out as an example, work really hard to be creative, to work with their account holders to better their financial options out there. I guess at this point, I don't want to take up any more of your time. And I'm just happy to answer any questions. And like Chris, I want to point out that we are available for whatever your needs are. We want to work closely with all of you on the issues that come before the committee. And we'll be here at your call or when you don't call sometimes, and willing to assist in whatever way. We too get calls from lawmakers occasionally saying, I had John Doe, who lives next door to me, say that, he had a car loan from his credit union. And why is it that his credit union came and, I don't know, poor example probably, but repossessed his car for no good reason. And as you discussed before, two sides to every story. And we handle those situations carefully, go to the credit union, but, usually when somebody's not paying their loan, there's consequences to that, and so be talked to by your lender. So anyway, but we're happy to work on those kinds of situations with you if you have any constituency issues and anything you want to know. One thing I didn't mention is that, and I don't know what Chris's relationship is with the American Bankers Association, but our Association of Vermont Credit Unions has a very joined at the hip relationship with our National Trade Association. There's an Association of Vermont Credit Unions type entity in every state in the country doing these kinds of things. But we are heavily dependent on our national organization to interact or to guide us and coordinate our efforts at a federal level. We're responsible for doing our federal lobbying, but we all, in all the states, want to be giving our delegations, a similar kind of message and coordination and whatnot. So we're dependent on them to assist us with that, and they're very effective at that. But one of the things that they have that's of great assistance to us, that's reflected in the documents that I just gave you, is they have a very comprehensive economics and research department that accesses a lot of available information, analyzes it, slices and dices it in many different ways, and lets us be able to have access to like this HMDA information I just shared with you and things of that nature. So if there's ever anything that comes up in your committee regarding financial services that you think we might be able to draw on that resource to produce data for you, let us know.
Any questions?
Thank you all.
Looking at page 2,
Yeah.
is that one, it might be nice to get a run through of direct, indirect, and induced economic
Sure.
activity. But the question that I had was also about, so your workforce appears to be about 1,250 individuals. Do they have the same or broadly similar professional development sort of standards as employees at banks?
Of course.
So this, is it this, they go to the same programs? Like how, is there any differentiation between the skill sets?
So varies by position, of course, but if you are a business lender, mortgage lender, and so on and so forth, there are going to be federal and state requirements of those positions of what the knowledge level is and certification level and so on and so forth, not what people are registered. So yes, in that regard, it's the same thing. They might go to different lending schools and things like that. But yes, the level of knowledge and expertise for positions in credit unions is no different than it is in any other kinds of financial institution. You referenced about the direct, indirect, and induced. Direct in regard to jobs created by credit unions. So yes, when this data was available, which is probably at least a year old now, it was 1,200 jobs in Vermont credit unions. Indirect level of jobs is referencing services that credit unions employ that, and the people that basically saw, you're putting up a branch, the people that are employed to do that, so on and so forth. And then induced would be the people of the next level beyond that, which would be, service providers are using other services, that kinds of thing. Right?
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
We get to Chris, but you to weigh in as well, but something that you may not be aware of, when we legalized cannabis in Vermont, a piece of that came to us because of the banking. And so can you just talk a little bit about how those businesses, or can they be banked?
It varies by institution. And when some of you might remember from newspaper articles, if nothing else, that when retail cannabis across the country first became a thing, I guess I'll call it, and we started reading and hearing about it and elsewhere, particularly early days in Colorado and whatnot, cannabis-related entities had a great deal of difficulty finding places to get financial services of any sort, much less deposit cash. And that's because the federal law at the time and still does consider it an illegal substance. There has been since that time, soft interpretations at the federal level from regulatory agencies that they haven't yet enforced, haven't gone into a credit union or a bank, whatever kind of a financial institution, and taken away their charter because they were serving an entity that was selling an illegal substance, even though the law says that they could go to that extreme. With that said, over the years since then, financial institutions of all types have had different levels of apprehension about what they can and can't do, what they want to do, for a while. And I don't know, Chris, you might know this. There was a time, and there may still be, where networks like Visa and MasterCard said, no, we're not going to allow those entities to process credit cards with our brand on them and things of that nature. So it made it challenging for financial institutions to handle the financial needs of retail cannabis outlets. So in Vermont, when we had, was it 5 or 6, I think, medical dispensaries that were developed, the only entity at the time that stepped forward and was willing to service them was Vermont State Employees Credit Union, now merged with New England Federal Credit Union to form East Rise Credit Union. And I believe, I haven't asked, but I believe they're still serving those dispensaries, or there are an option for those dispensaries. When retail businesses started being permitted in Vermont, a number of credit unions, and I presume banks too, probably talked about it and entertained it. But there was still a lot of apprehension because nothing had changed at a federal level, even though there had been no slaps on the hands or penalties or whatnot. But in Vermont so far, Vermont Federal Credit Union has been, by my recollection, the most active provider of what financial services it can provide to retail cannabis entities. So business lending, lines of credit, so on and so forth. I don't think they can provide credit, much less debit cards, because of the branding issue from the national networks, but a checking account and so on and so forth. So those businesses, have a place to go to fill their lending needs should they have them, and more importantly, to deposit their proceeds from the day. Out west, Colorado, Washington State, there was a period of time where it was a public threat. These businesses were having to literally take all the cash that they collected during the course of the day, because they can only collect cash, not checks, because they had no place to process them, not plastic cards. And they take bags of cash to whatever local institution, if there was one, to deposit them or keep it in a box someplace. So there was on the street, very much a threat with all that cash going around. So credit unions in those areas, answered that need and said, we'll start at least being a depository for these institutions. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. Thank you very much for that explanation. I'm actually a cannabis retail worker,
Ah,
so I'm very familiar with this whole situation.
Great.
And I will just make the note that although there are some credit unions and banks in Vermont that are actually taking cannabis dollars, some of the bigger problems, like, for instance, is the locational issue. So my shop is down south in southern Vermont, and we still have to, because of the card processing issues, we still choose to be cash only and still have to transfer that cash.
someplace.
Yes, and oftentimes, for a while, actually, due to the business structure of the overall business, they got booted from one bank and have had to run around trying to find another bank. And it also means sometimes taking those deposits and driving them up to Burlington. So there's definitely still some
Well, for sure.
in the chain.
For sure.
Making it from-
I mentioned about Vermont Federal Credit Union being the most active, and so that's great for entities that are near their locations, but in situations that you described, it's a different story. And there are some other credit unions. I think there's 1 or 2 other credit unions that do some limited amount of services in wherever their footprint is in the state of Vermont. And I know of 1 or 2 banks, Chris, I think, that were kind of in then out, and I'm not sure. It's been kind of evolving kind of situation,
Which
Did you wanna-
you illustrate representative as a public safety issue.
right?
Oh,
That
that's
is a
absolutely.
concern. The problem that you face in Vermont is the conflict between state policy and federal policy.
Mhm.
And we've been working to try and get the feds and Congress to pass the SAFE Act or the SAFER Act. And for the life of me, I can't figure out why the damn Senate won't do it. The House has passed it 7 times.
It's,
And it's crazy, but the challenge, so we've had one bank that was doing it and then pulled out because the regulatory oversight was just too difficult to meet. We had another bank who explored it and came to the conclusion that they would need to hire 4 individuals just to monitor cannabis, and the cost of the services would be so prohibitive to the industry. Now I have another bank that was just started to get involved with it. Even though the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network at the federal level and groups like the FDIC and even a memo from the Department of Justice has said it's okay as long as you meet certain parameters. The parameters are tough to meet. And then you've got, my words, the whiplash of working with different administrations. So now we're going into a different time where there's less confidence that Department of Justice would continue to turn a blind eye. And when your institution's charter and you as bankers are personally held liable, it's a third rail you're just not going to touch. Yet in Vermont, it's a very viable legal business. So we're often asked what can be done. Nothing in Vermont. We need the damn feds
Federal
to change their policy. And it's not to, it's only to change it to remove it from the Schedule I, which then clears the way to offer financial services.
right.
And we take no position whether it's right or wrong usage, legality of it. We just clear the road so that we can work with what's been deemed viable businesses.
There was some discussion a while back, and I forgot what became of it, about reclassifying cannabis from Schedule I to II, was it?
Yeah, there had been, and it kind of just
But
fell off.
right,
Yeah.
right.
I think it actually had gotten approval for study, but the whole idea was that the study was gonna take forever, so.
Well, with the growing number, a large number of states now that are in a similar state as Vermont, not pun intended, similar situation as Vermont with the legality, you would think that, Congress would see its way clear, at least to enact a safe harbor to allow financial services for these entities.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
it's going to take.
it's getting to the point actually where it's becoming less viable for these companies to run and for the industry to grow.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, if you have suggestions or ideas that we can talk to our credits about, let me know. Happy to pursue that.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee members.
So committee will break for lunch, back here on the clock. Agency comments should begin. So back here, 1 o'clock promptly and started.